Today I'm out in Tennessee taking a look at the all-new Nissan Ariya. According to detractors, the Nissan that's a day late and $1 short. Now, the day late is definitely accurate because the Ariya should have been on sale about a year ago, and you're going to see this on dealer lots October of this year. That's thanks to the pandemic and the ongoing chip shortage. But when it comes to the $1 short part, it really depends on how you look at it. You see, the Ariya is going to have a higher sticker price for the base model than some of the competition, starting at $43,190. But let's dive into that in this video and find out, is that $43,000 worth it? And is the $60,000 that you'll pay for the top-end version, does that seem worth it as well? Now, the biggest reason the base price on the Ariya is higher than most of the competition is because of the standard feature content. We find a ton of it on the Ariya. Standard leatherette upholstery, power driver's seat with memory. We also have heated front and rear seats, a heated steering wheel standard, LED headlights, the leatherette upholstery on the inside, the twin LCD cluster that you're going to see in a moment. The nav software is standard as well, as is the 2-zone automatic climate control and radar adaptive cruise control. All of that and that entire laundry list of features on the side of your screen are standard even in the base model. Then Nissan does something interesting. As you work your way up the trim ladder, if you want to say add all-wheel drive or the extended range battery pack, some options actually fall off of the vehicle rather than having not started on the Ariya in the first place. So the key thing to know is $43,190, tons of feature content standard, actually more appropriate competition to most of the mid-priced competition, except for perhaps the new Chevy Equinox, which is going to start around $30,000. Of course, in PR speak, around means over 30,000, so somewhere between 30 and 35 probably. So definitely less expensive than this, but you're not going to find all that same feature content on that Equinox. It remains to be seen exactly how the Ariya stacks up against the competition in terms of value, but it has a decent head start with that standard feature content. I really like these slim LED headlights, the daytime running lamp strip, that's standard as well. Fog lights, those are optional, and the front end definitely gives me sort of a Mercedes EV vibe. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. With a length just under 183 inches, the Ariya is right in line with the Mach-E, the Ioniq 5, the EV6, and other mainstream compact EV crossovers. This is not too far off the Tesla Model Y in terms of size, but thanks to the recent price bumps in the Model Y, it's going to be more expensive than this, with an asterisk because it's possible that there are going to be some versions of the Model Y that will get an EV tax credit starting January 2023, and because this is built in Japan, it will not qualify for that new federal tax credit scheme. That really caught everybody off guard, including Nissan, so I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few years they decided to move Ariya production to the United States, but we don't have any details about that just yet. You'll notice that we have a fairly short hood profile here, so no front trunk under there, and front-wheel drive is standard on the Ariya, so that's definitely different than the Ioniq 5 or the Mach-E, or of course the EV6 as well, but pretty similar to Toyota's EV. Up here we find the charge door on the passenger side, and inside there we find a CCS connector. This is the first time Nissan has used that in North America, and thank goodness, because it is the much easier charging system to find. The clean and modern design continues out back, where we find really simple and clean LED taillight modules. The Nissan logo is actually under the clear plastic section. That should make that easier to clean. It looks pretty aerodynamic back here, except for this rear windshield wiper, and that is a bit of a surprise because so many EV crossovers are deleting that feature. If you're interested in a wiper, as I know Brian probably is, then you might want to take a look at the Ariya over the competition. In terms of design aesthetic, I think this is as attractive to my eye in a totally different way as the Ioniq 5 and the EV6, and actually a little bit more attractive than the Mustang Mach-E. The Mach-E kind of looks like a regular Mustang that got stung by a bee, and this looks more like a modern interpretation of a Nissan Murano. Now let's dive into the details. When the Ariya goes on sale in October 2022, you're only going to be able to buy front-wheel drive models. Then a little bit later, starting in early 2023, the all-wheel drive dual motor models, those are going to start going on sale. At the beginning, it's going to come with 2 different batteries and 2 different power levels. There's a 66 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack or a 91 kilowatt-hour battery pack. Those are usable capacities. The battery pack is positioned underneath the seats, and it is actively heated and actively cooled. There's a battery heater mat in the battery tray, and then it cools it using the air conditioning system up front. There are going to be 2 different electric motors, or at least 2 different power levels. Nissan hasn't been overly specific there. 214 horsepower with the base battery pack, 238 horsepower with the bigger battery pack, and the same torque rating of 221 pound-feet. Later, when you get the dual motor model, you'll be able to get up to 389 horsepower and 442 pound-feet of torque. Nissan has not given us detailed specifications on the dual motor model with the small battery pack, but that is going to be an option. And interestingly, that is going to be almost as fast as the big battery pack with the dual motor option, so expect power figures to be pretty close to that 389 horsepower number. The base model is going to start at $43,190. Adding the second motor is going to bump that price tag up to $47,190, but you get to choose, do you want all-wheel drive and the small battery, or do you want front-wheel drive and the big battery for the same price? Not all the range figures are in just yet for the Ariya, but it should run from about 304 miles of range at the most down to 216 miles. And of course, all the different trims are going to slot there in between, depending on exactly which versions you get. If you get the very top-end Platinum all-wheel drive model with the big battery pack, it's probably going to be somewhere around 265 miles according to Nissan because of the options, the added weight, and some different tire and wheel combinations as well. When it comes to charging, Nissan giveth and Nissan taketh away. The Ariya now uses the CCS DC fast charge standard, as I said before. That's going to allow this to go from 10% to 80% charge in 40 minutes. That is significantly faster charging than we find in the Nissan Leaf, and it's the same charging standard that everything else in America, except for the Nissan Leaf, supports. Even the latest Tesla models have a CCS adapter standard, so everybody theoretically in the future could share just one plug. Now, the onboard level 2 charger, it is a little on the slow side, 7.2 kilowatts versus 10 to 11 like we find in most of the competition standard. Whether or not that's a problem for you will depend on what kind of EVSE you have at home. Most folks out there actually have about a 6.6 to 7 kilowatt EVSE at home, so it's not going to make too much of a difference. If you do want to support some of the fastest level 2 charging available in America, the 19.2 standard that we're going to find in a variety of different EVs coming soon, including the Equinox, that's going to require a really hefty electrical change to your home. It's going to need to support an 80 amp charge. That's a lot of expense, a lot of power being sucked down at once. So not everybody out there is even going to be able to support that. But if you want it, you won't find it in here, and you will find it in the competition. Now, the peak DC fast charge rate on this one is 130 kilowatts. That's not as exciting as the Ioniq 5 or the EV6. Those will charge in about half the time, but it is right in line with the Toyota, the Subaru, and yes, even the Ford competition. Base versions of the Mach-E, they'll actually charge a little bit slower than this. As I've come to expect from Nissan, I found the driver's seat to be very comfortable. This is a multi-way power driver's seat with 4-way adjustable lumbar support and 2-position memory over there on the door. Now, the base version of the Ariya is going to have a power driver's seat, but oddly enough, not every Ariya on the dealer lot will have that power seat. This one also has a power passenger seat, but it's lacking the 4-way lumbar, but other than that, it's basically the same design. We also have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty large range of motion. Jumping into the back seat, there is a ton of room back here. According to the numbers, this has a little bit less legroom than we find in the Mach-E or the Ioniq 5, but in reality, I think it's about the same, and it simply has to do with the way that this is apportioned. The seating is a bit more upright, which means that you can move that front seat a little bit further forward, a little bit closer to the dashboard, and that gives us a lot more room back here in the rear. Things are pretty comfortable because we have a completely flat floor, and here in the center, my hair is just barely brushing the ceiling, but my head's not touching the ceiling, even if I raise that headrest and put my head all the way back there to the rear. Scooting all the way over, this front seat's all the way back in its tracks. You see, I can still have about 4 inches of legroom left. Now, these rear seats, they don't have the same kind of recline that we find in other Nissan vehicles. There's just a one-stage recline, and it only moves maybe about 3/4 of an inch or so. We do, however, have a padded center armrest with 2 large cup holders, and of course, you can fold these seats completely flat. Also a nice touch, the shoulder belt for the center seat position comes out of the seat rather than out of the ceiling. That makes it easier to deal with child seats and also makes that cargo area a bit more square. Rear passengers get standard air vents, and interesting twist, the base model has standard heated seats, but when you start stepping up, the heated seats disappear and then reappear later in the trim walk. Behind the power hatch, we find 22.8 cubic feet of cargo capacity, which does put this a little below average for the compact crossover segment. This 22-inch roller bag cannot be in that position and then still have the hatch close if this tonneau cover is in place. It is one of the rigid variety, so you do have to pull it out and then stash it somewhere if you want to maximize your cargo carrying capacity. Then you could line up several of those bags back here and still close the hatch. As we see in other Nissan vehicles, there is a place to stick this. If I pull that out of the way really quickly, you can see that we have the divide and hide storage system. This is a variation of that theme that we find in the Rogue. I can pull up the lower floor, It's in two positions, pop it in that position, and then I could, for instance, store this rigid cargo cover right there under the floor. But obviously that means now that I can't use all that space right there. That's also where you could put the charge cord because, of course, again, no front trunk. Even further down the rabbit hole, we have this enormous foam divider that is suspiciously shaped like a spare tire, because if I pull that completely out of the way, we actually find what looks like a place where you could put a compact donut if you wanted to get one aftermarket. Nissan has not been able to comment just yet, but I suspect other world markets for the Ariya will offer a compact spare tire, and because we have this mounting point here, you could probably get that spare tire and put it in your North American Ariya if you wanted to. Otherwise, we just have this foam divider with a bit of additional storage space. Honestly, this foam divider takes up a lot of room. Then we have the inflator, can affix a flat, etc. Now let's take a quick look around the interior. Keep in mind this is, at the moment, the top trim front-wheel drive model. We have a panoramic moonroof. It's not as big as the ones in the Tesla or the Mach-E, but the front section does open. We have a mix of different upholstery materials in here. On the backs of the seats, we have a fabric section. We then have an imitation leather section, and then an imitation suede section right there in the front. Although these seats are perforated, they're not ventilated, they're just heated. On the front doors, we have soft touch materials up top, harder materials down below, and then we have what kind of looks like a speaker grille with white paint behind. That's actually an ambient light strip, and it matches what's going on between the driver and passenger footwells with that ambient light box right there. It's kind of a cool touch at night. It really helps illuminate the cabin, makes it feel a little bit warmer and more interesting. Up here on the dashboard, we find standard 12.3-inch LCDs, a touch one for the infotainment system, and a non-touch display for the instrument cluster. The center screen supports wireless full-screen CarPlay. We then have a line of buttons over here on the left side that are always there for direct access to things like the factory navigation interface that is standard as well, and of course the home screen, which has been modified versus some other Nissan products. The system is not quite as snappy as the Hyundai and Kia systems, but definitely snappier and more reliable than the one that we find in the Ford currently. We then have touch controls integrated into this imitation wood section along the dashboard, and then this is partially open here, but we have a power opening and closing storage area here in the dash. You can power this and stop it in certain places if you want to, say, have your smartphone here and have it up at an angle, or your iPad as your DC fast charging. Inside, there's a large storage console right there. Lots of storage available in there, because in the center console, there is not a lot of storage going on. Over here, we have two cup holders, we have a joystick style shifter, a tiny area just under there where you can keep your smartphone. This center console is powered, which is kind of an interesting twist. Here are the controls over here to power move it, so that way you can see where you can keep your smartphone there. But because of that power mechanism, there's not a lot of storage space going on in here. In fact, actually quite little right there. We do, however, have a Qi wireless charging mat, and I was able to charge my smartphone with thicker covers on it. And you can see that we have the little charging icon right there to let you know that there's still a phone in that little storage slot. The LCD instrument cluster software looks a lot like what we see in the Nissan Rogue, obviously modified for an electric vehicle. We then have a two-spoke steering wheel with a flat bottom down there, controls to the infotainment system over here, controls that multifunction LCD right there in the middle, and then the controls for the cruise control and the hands-off-the-wheel steering system. This does have a Cadillac Super Cruise-like system where you can just keep your eyes on the road and just drive hands-free for miles and miles, which is why we have a driver monitoring system right here on top of the steering wheel. You're going to find that in the top two trims of Ariya. I like the fact that Nissan continues to give us a charge time estimate here in the instrument cluster. You can see that if I were to connect to a level 1 charge cord, it would take 10 hours to get completely full. And then I can adjust this so I can see what it'd be like if I had access to a 7.2 kilowatt EVSE. You can see it would only take 100 minutes there. And then, of course, I could adjust that all the way up to the DC fast charge speed of 130 kW, so I could see what that would take. It'd be 35 minutes because, of course, the charge rate up from 86% to 100% is not overly swift. Now, as far as adjusting the drive modes go, you can adjust the drive modes with this little toggle right here. You can choose between Sport, Standard, and Eco. You can choose the E-Step mode, which is sort of like one-pedal driving. And we then have the auto brake hold button over here. And if you don't want one-pedal driving, but you want more aggressive regen, you can go down to drive and then click it down once more for the B mode. Now, I say one pedal like rather than actual one pedal because this will never take you to a complete stop and hold you there like some vehicles with a true one pedal drive mode. So it's similar, but not quite the same thing. The first thing we need to do is talk about acceleration. If I floor it, We wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. Then max power happens right around 40 miles an hour. And if you continue waiting, you'll get to 60 in 7.3 seconds in this front-wheel drive model. If you get the dual motor model, that drops significantly down to about 5.1 seconds or so for the standard range model with 2 motors, down just below 5 seconds according to Nissan if you get the extended range battery and the dual motor setup. That is going to be the fastest version of the Ariya. Now, why did Nissan choose to put just one electric motor up front rather than putting a single electric motor in the back like we find in the Mach-E, the EV6, or the Ioniq 5? Yes, a rear electric motor makes those EVs an awful lot of fun in their base single motor versions, but they're not going to be quite as good on snow, ice, etc. as a front-wheel drive vehicle could be, and they're likely giving up a bit of regen ability as well. You can regen brake on the rear motor, lots of EVs do it, but dynamically that can be challenging on ice, on snow, on slippery surfaces, etc. And generally speaking, the same electric motor put in the front of an identical vehicle could regenerate more power back into the battery. So there's an efficiency component here as well. And that's why Nissan's not the only one doing single motors just in the front. We see that in Polestar. We also are likely going to see that in Volvo models in the future, and we already currently see it in Toyota EVs. Dynamically, it just makes sense. There is no particular cost savings to just putting an electric motor up front when the vehicle was designed as an EV from the ground up, and they could just as easily have stuck one back there in the rear. Speaking of braking, this does have a blended braking system, meaning that when I put my foot on the brake pedal, it's not just going to engage the friction brakes. It's actually going to ramp up the regen braking until friction brakes are required, then it's going to blend them into the system. That's definitely different than we find in modern Teslas, where the brake pedal is just a brake pedal. It doesn't command more regen. Now, speaking of commanding regen, I have multiple ways of doing that. I can put this in different drive modes. So if I toggle the drive mode down to Eco, I basically get no regen. I just coast along. That is theoretically the most energy efficient way of driving an EV down the road, because regen is not 100% effective. And if you plan ahead and just coast on down there, that's going to give you the most efficient drive. Now, I can command more if I toggle this drive control down to B, so I have instant access over an extra level of regen, or I can engage the E-step mode, which is sort of like one pedal driving, but not quite. If I let this go, it's going to take me all the way down here to maybe about 5 to 7 miles an hour or so, and then it's going to continue creeping forward. Even though this has auto brake hold, it's not going to engage it until I come to an absolute complete stop, like right there. Then it's going to hold me at the stop. Then I can continue forward. I think that's a little bit funky. I'm not the biggest fan of one pedal drive mode, but why we have this in between, I'm not entirely sure. I prefer it just with the E-step off, and I would rather command the braking either with my foot on the brake pedal in the sailing mode that we find in Eco, or the ability to control it with this B mode that's easily enterable and exitable with the shifter. But I think shift paddles would be a nice touch like we find in the Ioniq 5 or the EV6. When it comes to handling ability, the Ariya does pretty well. This is an awful lot of fun out on these winding roads out here in Tennessee. The low center of gravity really helps out the handling in the Ariya, as do the standard 235 with tires that we find here. These are wider than the tires that we find standard on the Mach-E. That surprised me. I had expected slightly narrower tires here. Likely Nissan was willing to give up a little bit of efficiency for the extra grip. You will find wider tires available on the Ioniq 5 and EV6, not standard though, and I do think that when so equipped, those models do handle a little bit better than the Ariya, but this is a surprising amount of fun. It has a really good stable ride to it. It's nice and level in the corners. There is a bit more tip and dive, a bit more body roll than we find in the Mach-E, but it's not objectionable by any stretch. But the thing that's the most different about the Ariya versus the Mach-E or a Model Y especially is the ride quality. It is really, really good in the Ariya. This has a nice smooth ride to it, whether I'm on the gravel sections of the road that I was on earlier or this somewhat roughly paved section of asphalt here. You really don't feel those small imperfections coming into the cabin. This doesn't have an adaptive suspension system, and I don't think it needs one. It just has a really great ride to it. I would say this is easily the equal to or slightly better than the ride quality that we find in the Ioniq 5 and the EV6, which are also very, very good. This is tuned towards the softer and quieter and more comfortable side of things versus most of the alternatives. And quiet is definitely something you'll notice. Nissan says that this is the quietest entry in this segment. Now, I haven't been able to independently verify that, but I would not be surprised if that were the case. This definitely is quiet, cruising along these roughly paved roads at 50 miles an hour or so. This is the kind of vehicle you could easily daily commute, long road trip in, etc., without being tired from the noise and the bumps on the road, etc. This is a really isolated cabin, and in that respect, it reminds me a bit of the Cadillac Lyriq, which I recently drove. Also kind of makes me think this is what an electric Lexus could be like or should be like. Now, I haven't driven the upcoming Lexus RZ, but I wouldn't be surprised if its tuning was actually quite similar to the Ariya. This gives up a little bit of handling ability, but on the other side, it gains ride quality, cabin quietness, and cabin comfort as well. It's a bit difficult to talk about efficiency because I haven't been driving this on my usual test loop, but so far I've been averaging 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour, and that has included highway driving, rural driving like this, and a lot of idling and photo shooting as well. Fuel economy appears to be pretty similar to the EV6 and definitely a little bit above the Mach-E. The Mach-E does have a bigger battery pack, but it's not necessarily going to get you further because it is a bit less efficient. I'm really glad that Nissan decided to tune the Ariya a little bit differently than the Mustang Mach-E. That has that firm and bouncy ride quality that we see in a lot of performance EVs, and it's not quite my cup of tea. This is a lot more comfortable, a lot more daily driver livable as well. Now, the slower DC fast charge time is a bit of a bummer for longer road trips, but this suspension tuning is certainly much more comfortable, and we have the hands-free driving assist system. If you want to know more about Nissan's ProPilot 2.0 system, check out my separate video on that. That's going to be coming very, very soon. This system is almost as good as Cadillac Super Cruise. I think there is just a tiny bit of difference between the two, but it is significantly better than the Blue Cruise system that we find in the Mach-E. So if you're interested in hands-free driving in your next EV, you should definitely put the Ariya on your shopping list. Now let's try slicing and dicing the price tag a little bit. The base price on the Ariya is going to be $43,190. If you want all-wheel drive on that base battery pack, that bumps all the way up to $47,190, but keep in mind it is significantly faster than this. 0 to 60 goes from around 7.5 seconds all the way down there to around 5 seconds 0 to 60. If you want the bigger 91 kilowatt hour battery pack, that's also $47,190. For that same price point, shoppers have an interesting decision to make. Do you want the shortest range Ariya, which would be the smallest battery pack with all-wheel drive, or do you want the longest range Ariya, which would be the extended range battery pack and front-wheel drive? If you want the big battery pack and all-wheel drive, that's $51,190. The most expensive front-wheel drive trim is this one here. It's the Premier model. It's going to be $54,000 approximately, and the very top-end version, Platinum all-wheel drive, is going to be $60,190 starting, plus of course tax, title, license, and that destination charge. Now the Platinum all-wheel drive model is not going to give you 300 miles of range. That's going to be down there towards 260, perhaps 270. We don't have official details just yet because of the added weight, the added features, and all of that. The longest range model again is going to be front-wheel drive, big battery. Shortest range model is going to be small battery and dual motor setup. That's going to be again $47,190. Now as far as price tag comparisons go, the Ariya compares really well if you're taking a look at the standard range battery front-wheel drive model. $43,190, that's higher than the starting price we find in most of the competition at the moment, but we have tons and tons of standard feature content. I think if I were shopping for an Ariya, that's probably where I would stop, would be that base front-wheel drive model. You do have to give up some features if you step up the ladder, interestingly enough, and that is a weird twist. So if you step up the ladder into the next trim, you lose the power driver seat with the memory, things like that. Also not a bad deal is the front-wheel drive extended range model for $47,190. That again compares really quite well with most of the competition, and the range figures are excellent, giving over 300 miles of range. If you're interested in the ProPilot Assist 2.0 system, and I bet that a lot of you probably are, the minimum price point of entry for that is going to be $53,690 for the Empower Extended Range front-wheel drive trim. That's going to give you that Cadillac Super Cruise-like hands-off-the-wheel steering system. It's going to do all the steering for you on the approved mapped roads, which is basically limited access highway across the US, for miles and miles and miles, as long as you're paying attention to the driving. And this system is considerably smoother than Ford's Blue Cruise system. I have to say, as I said in the drive section, I was really impressed with the behavior of this. It is much smoother, much more reliable, I would say, and much less fear-inducing than the Blue Cruise system. Blue Cruise in my Lightning and in the Mach-E, they will occasionally just veer off to the bushes for no particular reason, and Ford has not done a good job of notifying the driver when mode changes are happening. Nissan has done a much, much better job of that. And one of the reasons for that is the standard heads-up display in this vehicle. It actually keeps your eyes a little higher up and a little bit closer to the road even than the systems that we find in the General Motors lineup, which can have Super Cruise without a heads-up display, so you just have that light on the steering wheel. The light on the steering wheel was an amazing innovation, and it is significantly better than we find in Ford, but the heads-up display, I think, is actually taking things to the next level. Then if you want to get crazy with options on your Ariya, it's going to be up there at about $60,190 plus tax, title, license, and destination. And that's the model that, for me, makes a lot less sense, because for $60,000, you're really in Model Y territory after the federal tax credit on that vehicle. And obviously that is the benchmark in the segment. This is going to be more comfortable, it's going to be quieter on the inside, etc., but it's not going to handle as well, and it's not going to have that Tesla logo on the front. And of course, if you want to go 0 to 60 in absolutely bonkers times, you will find faster 0 to 60 times in most of the competition. But the Nissan does come back with a really quiet ride, a really soft ride, which is very, very comfortable seats as well. So if you're looking for really, in a way, the Lexus of electric vehicles, I would argue it's the Nissan Ariya. This reminds me a lot of an electrified Lexus RX, to be honest. We don't know exactly what the RZ is going to be from Lexus coming soon, but I suspect it's going to be in a very, very similar vein to the Ariya, and the Ariya is probably going to be less expensive. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section, and with that in mind, would you be interested in something like an Ariya or a Lexus RZ? I think in some ways that's a better comparison until we see an Infiniti EV, which we should be seeing very, very soon. Nissan has already said that they're going to build 2 EVs in America. One's going to be a Nissan, one's going to be an Infiniti. They're probably going to be close relatives of this, and then I wouldn't be surprised if at some point the Ariya ended up being produced in the US, so that way it could have the tax credit. And that tax credit could mean everything for some and absolutely nothing for other people. Remember, you do have to have a minimum tax liability in order to actually exercise that credit. So if you're not paying a lot in federal taxes, it's probably meaningless to you. If you have mortgage deductions, child deductions, etc., you might not be really paying enough federal taxes for that to make an effect. But if you are, then a decent number of the competition could be less expensive, Mach-E, Equinox, etc. So let me know what you think about all that. What would you pick if your cash were on the line? And what do you think of Nissan's position of making the base version such an interesting value with such standard feature content, but a higher MSRP? Let me know. Find me at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the social places. I'll see all of you next week.